How do you build a portfolio when you don't own the intellectual property? What questions should you ask an attorney when looking for someone to bring on board? Should they be local or can they be in another state? How do you know when to call your attorney when a client is being difficult? We've never had those, have we? What do you say to legally protect yourself when a client is shopping your work? And what about business insurance? Do you need it? And is it critical right out of the gate? I'm thrilled to have David Adler in today's episode as part of our Creating a Design Business series for this conversation about legalities. David owns a boutique law firm blending corporate law and intellectual property counseling business in arts, entertainment, media, communications, and technology. His peers have designated him as an Illinois leading lawyer and an Illinois super lawyer in intellectual property and entertainment and media law. Outside the practice of law, Mr. Adler was an adjunct professor teaching music law at DePaul College of Law, formerly chaired the Chicago Bar Association's Media and Entertainment Law Committee, and is currently a member of the Illinois State Bar Association's Intellectual Property Committee and for the ISBA Privacy and Information Security Law Section Council. Stick around for a great conversation, as you won't want to miss how many years in the legal profession an attorney should have under their belt before you hire them. You know we had to do the legal, so here it is. This episode offers general information, not legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is formed by listening. Legal situations vary. Always consult a qualified attorney for personalized guidance. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are so glad that you're here. You probably don't hear that as an attorney very often. We are so glad that you're here.
Depends on the context.
A very fair point. Very fair point. So I really have been excited to have this conversation to start from a hierarchical perspective, and then we're going to drill down into some meat and potatoes of legalities specifically as it pertains to interior design. So many of our audience members have either started a firm or want to start a firm and are working at a much larger firm. And the one question that we have come up with over and over again is, how do I build a portfolio to strike out on my own when it isn't my intellectual property and it belongs to the firm that I'm at? Let's just start there, because I think your portfolio is everything as a designer, and you either have it or you don't, and it's kind of the litmus test of the quality of your work. So what do you do with that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it kind of has a couple different issues involved, not just the intellectual property issues on their own, but likely contractual issues or employment-related issues with the employer. For designers who are building their portfolio, obviously having a good relationship with your employer is important. I think I should step back and just talk about who owns what in the employment context, right? So without
Please
getting
do.
into the weeds, on copyright law, when you're an employee working within the scope of your employment, your employer owns all of the work product, all of the intellectual property rights associated with the work that you do for your employer, as long as it's within the scope of your employment. So for most designers working for a design firm, anything that you're doing for your employer is going to be owned by your employer. It's the way the law works. Now, that's not to say that you don't have some sort of fair use right to show your
What you
work,
created,
maybe on a
basically.
limited
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
And it's important to kind of understand like what copyright rights are, right? And if you're the owner of the copyright in a creative work, that means that you have the exclusive right to display it publicly, to distribute it, to make copies of it, to make derivative works. So any sort of use, right? And so including photographs of a project that a designer works on in the designer's portfolio implicates both that public display right, the reproduction right, and possibly the distribution right. So right, in a perfect world, the designer would get permission from the employer. However, the law recognizes certain exceptions, and in most cases, if a designer kept these photographs or kept copies of their work and only displayed them maybe to the client in private, just as an example of projects they've had experience with, in all likelihood, that would be okay. It's a little bit easier to kind of say things that you really shouldn't do. So don't take pictures and put them up on, your Facebook or your Instagram, or don't put them on your socials unless you have explicit permission to do so. Even if, I think even putting them up on a private website, which, is password protected, is still kind of pushing the bounds of risk. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I've seen scenarios where a former employer has objected to a former employee's use of photographs in that scenario. And the problem is, it just invites further dispute and argument, right? And the idea is that you as the designer want to get out there, you want to launch your career, you want to be able to say, this is my work, this is representative of what I can do, without running afoul or stepping on anybody else's toes. So, again, I think it begins with a conversation with the employer.
Hard.
Yeah, intellectual property rights are very nuanced, and you have a lot of overlap in creative areas, and interior design is an incredibly robust creative endeavor. There's so much creative work going on and so many different elements of the process that are creative and are protectable to some degree or another. Photographs and things like that are probably the most common aspect of the design process that have these rights attached to them. So, but there's other aspects to it. So it's important, and it's not easy. Intellectual property, to the best of my knowledge, isn't really taught at design school, or at least not the nuances. And
you're correct.
Even large design firms sometimes just have, a lack of understanding or exposure to it.
I think it's really tough, especially as the employer, because you don't want to see some of your best people creating this work walk out the door. By the same token, you want to help them succeed professionally. And in all reality, all of marketing anymore, I shouldn't say all, but I feel like it's about 90% of it, is done in a digital format that's out there where it can be easily discoverable. That's the point, right? So is there a way, it really just does come down to the conversation, right? Because there really isn't an easy way to put yourself out there in a public format to secure new clients without just being transparent and honest with your current employer.
Right. I think, my advice has always been get permission first. And I know there are some people out there who think they're a little bit on the maverick, kind of bleeding edge, and say, ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And that can be a very expensive way to find out that that's not good operational advice. But, you also have to keep it in context. We talked a little bit about photographs. It's possible for the designer to maybe take some photographs of their own work and, with their own camera, whether it's cell phone or something else. If they were to take those photographs, okay, they would own the rights to those photographs theoretically. It kind of does cross that line of whether those photographs are within the scope of the employment and therefore, regardless of who takes them, owned by the employer. But I think if they were taken with the intent of just using them for portfolio and not for any other commercial purpose, my guess is, the designer would probably be okay.
Great perspective. You mentioned expense. When I am a new designer hearing this podcast, I'm going to go, why are we having an attorney on? Or I shouldn't say a new designer, but someone who just opened their doors or wants to hang out their shingle. Attorneys are really expensive, and that's a big investment. My advice is always go find the resource before you need to use it. What is the reason why I should find an attorney? And we're going to talk about specifically intellectual property attorney in a minute, but why do I need to find an attorney before I have a need for an attorney?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think if you are out there and you want to start a successful business, part of your process needs to be making sure that you're doing everything the correct way. And so just like you would go out and hire an accountant to manage your accounting function, there are lots of legal hoops that need to be jumped through. There are regulations that need to be, followed. and just other things that you can do to limit the risk of being in business. And that's why you talk to an attorney. It's
I
you have to
totally
look at
agree.
it as an investment. And I agree, some lawyers can be expensive and some situations can be expensive, but if you look at it as an investment at the beginning, you'll be saving money in the long run, because it costs a lot more to hire a lawyer to come in and fix a problem than it does to hire a lawyer to avoid the problem in the first place. So, that's kind of my perspective on that. And then, adding to it, it certainly helps to have lawyers who are familiar with your particular industry. Now, it's a little bit self-serving for me to say that. I've been working with interior designers for 25 years, but there are, other industries where you would look to a lawyer who has a specialty, or at least a very good working familiarity with your industry, so they know the issues and they can help you prepare and navigate around those.
That makes complete sense. And I think, too, you nailed it. If you're listening to this, you said it so well. It is a lot more expensive to fix something than it is to prevent it in the world of law. Well, we don't live in that pond every day, or we don't swim in that pond every day. We don't necessarily always think about that. If I'm getting ready to hire an intellectual property attorney, what questions do I need to be asking out of the gate? And should I be charged for even asking those questions as I'm trying to find the right person to do this? Do I even have to stay in my own state to find an intellectual property attorney?
Okay, so you got a couple different questions here. Let me see if I can get all of them.
Sorry.
Let's just start with the
Stream of
state one.
thought.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. So intellectual property tends to straddle both state and federal law. It tends to be very transactional, although it also has a litigation component, just like car accidents and slip and falls and things like that. So, I'd say it helps to have a local attorney regardless. But if you can't find somebody who really kind of meets your needs locally, for certain types of things, having somebody located in another state is fine, up to the point that, they can, what they can do for you, right? So, there are always limitations to what can be done in certain circumstances. But generally speaking, I mean, most intellectual property attorneys are pretty conversant, countrywide. In terms of why do you need an intellectual property attorney in the first place, that really has to do more with the fact that interior design is a very creative industry. So it is one of those industries where intellectual property rights are necessarily part of what you live and breathe. And it's not always thought about, and it's not always well understood. When you get into other industries like arts and entertainment, film, music, things like that, everybody understands, okay, these things are really about intellectual property rights. Even, we talk about patents, or, pharmaceuticals, or technology development, right? Everybody understands that those things are all about the intellectual property rights. When you talk about interior design, people don't think about things like copyright and some of the other rights that are related to just the creative process, right? And so
That makes
having a
sense.
lawyer,
Yeah.
yeah, having a lawyer who understands that part of it is very, very helpful. A lot of lawyers do a lot of corporate work, and many corporate lawyers are very good at contracts work. Most contracts kind of fall within a particular range. Again, as you get into different industries, you get different nuances. But not all corporate lawyers also do intellectual property work. And for that matter, I mean, not all intellectual property lawyers will also do corporate work. So it's, I think it's important to have a lawyer who understands both, understands the business side as well as sort of the creative and intangible side.
So, what questions should I, as a designer who's either starting a firm or wanting to really grow a firm, when I'm interviewing you, what questions should I be asking of an attorney that they should have a pretty firm grasp on?
Well, the first couple of questions are very general, right? So you want to know, how long have you been practicing law, right? So if somebody's right out of law school, they're not going to be quite as experienced as somebody who's been practicing maybe 5, 10, 15 years. And I would say that for most lawyers, the 5-year mark is a pretty watershed mark. I think if if you're dealing with a lawyer with 5 years or more experience, they're probably highly competent at that point.
Okay. That's a
What
great
is
tip.
your experience? What's your experience in my industry, right? If a lawyer has no experience in your industry, or can't speak to the types of projects that they've done with similar types of businesses, there might be a learning curve for them to kind of figure out what it is you do and what it is you need. Now, that might be offset by somebody who's just got a great personality, somebody you really want to work with, somebody who you think is, really, really affordable. And so therefore, maybe you're willing to trade off some of that technical competence for a little more affordable rate, right? It's kind of up to you. I think there's different factors, but, you're looking for somebody who's experienced, somebody who's competent, somebody who's responsive, somebody who's a good communicator, and somebody who understands your business and what your needs are. Speaking from my own experience, early in my career, I worked with many, many startups, many technology startups here in Chicago, and then, elsewhere, but primarily here in Chicago. So, having that experience working with a new company, kind of understanding what's the process of getting all the legal ducks in a row, and what are all the things, what do new companies need? Do they need contracts? Do they need employment agreements? Do they need trademarks? What are the different things, the legal pieces of the puzzle that need to be completed? And what's the urgency for some of these things? Does everything need to be done on day one? Or, is there a way to approach this that, you can do it in stages, right? So I think, the
Yeah.
lawyer that you're looking to hire should be able to explain all of that to you. What you shouldn't expect is a substantive answer, right? You shouldn't call a lawyer for a first-time consultation and say, well, my client's doing this and they sent me this email, and what do you think I should do about it? Listen, I get those calls all the time, and I'm happy to help the designer, but you can't answer those questions until after you've kind of rolled up your sleeves and understood what the problem is, which mean being hired to perform substantive services. I think it is entirely reasonable to ask a lawyer for a free consultation to get a sense of what's their experience, what's their background, what's their interest. Do they think they can help you with what you need? All those are very legitimate questions, and they're not substantive. Those are the foundations of the relationship.
I love that you brought up the troublesome client because it's something we all deal with, regardless of what industry we're in or what vein of the design industry we're in, we should say. When do you get the attorney involved when you have a troublesome client? Because I feel like troublesome clients are something we deal with all the time. At what point do you want to have done that homework and interviewed that attorney, found out if they understand our industry, that they have at least 5 years of experience, as you shared? I love that's a great nugget of a watershed moment for legal. How do I know when to call my attorney if I have a client being a real little pill?
So I think it really depends on your comfort level as a business person. I think somebody who is newer to the industry or newer to running their own business, it's probably better to seek help earlier in the process, just because unless you've done this in a prior life, or you've got experience, or you've got a comfort level, it's possible that there may be things that you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know, and you certainly don't want to step on your own toes before you've even gotten out of the gate. So I would say if you're inexperienced or sort of new to the game, seek help early. But if you're a seasoned business executive and you're used to dealing with these types of issues, and you think you can handle it with a couple of phone calls, a couple of emails, and you're confident enough to stand your ground, no reason not to. Self-help is great.
In
Sometimes
so many realms.
these so many, yeah. If you can solve the problem on your own, then that's wonderful. But you also need to recognize that there's a point at which you might need to get the lawyer involved. And that's the point where you're not making any progress, right? So if your conversation is stalled, right? You're not continuing the conversation. There's radio silence. One side's gone dead. And you need some kind of communication. You need some kind of decision. You need some kind of action, and that's not happening. I think at that point it's time to pull some additional levers and see and kind of get some additional help.
Are you looking to improve your productivity by utilizing new technology? Check out DBM Consulting, as they are our go-to partner for exploring cutting-edge software and technology. From strategic analysis and reporting to custom software development and integrations, DBM Consulting specializes in finding and implementing the perfect software solutions so you can do more of the work you love and less of everything else. Visit dbm.consulting/colorworks to qualify for a promotional rate and receive a free 30-minute consultation. DBM Consulting, where art meets functionality. That's great feedback. And one thing we always see, especially being involved in different forums with designers, I love tracking what's going on as far as what problems we're facing, what trends we're seeing. Inevitably, things come, things go. The one thing that never goes away is the constant problem of my clients are shopping my product. What do you say to a designer who's tired of being shopped by their clients? What can we legally do to protect ourselves from constantly being shopped, or the client saying, I'm going to shop these one or two things, you're welcome to order the rest, and they pick the most expensive pieces? How do you navigate those waters legally while also keeping the client relationship intact to the best of our ability?
That's another one of those excellent questions, and it's one that comes up regularly from my own clients, both at the when they first come to me, as well as after I've been working with them for a while, and even when things are going smoothly. In a perfect world, the contract is the first place to start. So having a contract in place that is very clear on that purchasing role in the design relationship and the requirements of the designer. I think for many, many years, designers just understood how their purchasing function worked, and the client or the homeowner just sort of accepted it because there was really no way to, it was fairly opaque. It was basically, trust me, you've given me $50,000 here to spend, I'll spend it wisely. With the homeowner kind of really not knowing what cost what. The internet obviously has changed a lot of that, online retailing, so customers are a lot more informed. And I think they're just questioning things more, which is fine. It just means that the designer needs to be very, very clear about how they purchase. They need to, if possible, have some type of exclusivity for that purchasing function, and that can be addressed in a number of different ways. It has to be in the contract, right? You can't expect exclusivity to just be on a wink and a nod, but you can put it in your contract that the designer is the sole source of the products that are specified. You can make that a condition of completion of the design process. It's done in other industries, so it's not a foreign concept. And then there's other triggers and levers that you can put into the contract to kind of give the designer some leverage to basically disincentivize the client from going out and trying to shop things. My designer clients who are at the very high end don't see that issue at all. Yeah, the level of trust in the relationship is such that the homeowner just says, I trust you. This is the budget we worked out, and I know you'll stick to the budget, and I'll be happy with what I get. Then you have other people at the end of the spectrum who are either newer, less familiar, less trusting, people who've been burned before, who are just extra cautious this time around. And they're just looking for a lot more transparency and a lot more information. And again, the wholesale purchasing process, working with showrooms, working with specific vendors, working with trades, it's just not always well understood at the homeowner side of things. So, again, that all goes back to having a really good contract that's clear in terms of how the designer is getting paid, what the designer's responsibilities are, and the designer's role in that purchasing function, so that the client doesn't do that. And kind of two follow-on comments to that. Number one is, if you've got a client that's always shopping every selection you make, maybe you don't want that person as a client. Okay, so to me, that's kind of a red flag.
That is
this is just not going to work.
Brilliant point.
Yeah, I mean, no amount of money is worth putting up with that much aggravation. So if that's what is on the horizon, my advice is to, walk away. And then, the other one is it's a business decision, right? So, if you're sourcing something and, and you have a conversation with your client and they see something and they're like, hey, this is $100 less. Would you be okay if we bought that? That's up to you, right? If you as the designer can say, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that, right? You don't have to say, oh no, my contract specifies that everything, and if I let you do that, then I can't do that. No, you can make decisions like that as a business person.
I love that you brought that up because it brings in a level of pragmatism and it's client management. And so while we have all these legalities to protect us and protect our relationship with the client and whatnot, it's also really important, I think, to use a level of pragmatism. These are human beings that are soft and 70% water and have feelings and whatnot. And there's times when it's just a smart business decision to blow your nose on $100, so to speak, because you're preserving the relationship. They feel like they got a win out of it. When they leave and it ends on a happy note, the odds are they're coming back to you for their next project. $100 is really cheap marketing. And that's just how we choose to look at it as a firm. Because there are times you have to be careful what precedents you set and that you don't get them into bad habits. But by the same token, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And these legalities are extremely important. But I also feel the implementation of them is equally as important. Is that a fair statement?
100%. I think you have to understand what it means to run a business and what it means to be flexible. And the great thing about having the contract is it gives you the roadmap for your relationship with the client, and you as the business the person have the flexibility. You have to be pragmatic. As somebody once said, you can't pole vault over mouse turds, right? So you have to
That's a great
evaluate.
one.
Yeah, it's not mine. I heard it from somebody else. But it's
I
you
love
have
it.
to approach the issue at the right level.
What are the big legal issues you're seeing in our industry or that you even feel like are going to be on the horizon for our industry as we move forward? There's so many moving pieces right now. There's always trends and whatnot, but you also have huge economic components with interest rates being where they are. You have the AI component, which is I feel like the equivalent of the internet going online back in the day. It's going to be revolutionary to our industry. What do you see or forecast potentially that designers need to be aware of as far as legal issues facing our industry?
So I'm not seeing any specific industry trends regarding legal issues in interior design. There are issues in other industries which absolutely affect interior design. For example, there's a big push in some of the bigger commercial states, Illinois, New York, with right to work laws and laws that disfavor non-competes and non-solicits. And so, one thing that I have definitely seen over the last 10 years is more of my clients being concerned about protecting that client relationship, vendor relationships, and at least not having an unnecessary risk with employees departing and taking accounts with them, right? There's a legitimate business
Yeah.
interest to protect. On the one hand, absolutely, employees should be free to go out, hang out their own shingle, make their mark on the world. It's all wonderful. I mean, many of my clients do that. At the same time, right, businesses have a right to kind of protect those relationships that they've invested in and that they've developed. And so you just have to strike a balance. So a number of states have passed laws that have now added strict requirements about what those types of restrictions need to be in order to be enforceable, right? So that's something that
Yeah.
might be affecting interior designer firms, larger firms, architectural firms. Another thing, at least here in
Sure.
Illinois, is Chicago has like a new paid time off law going into effect, right? So I have
Oh,
design
interesting.
clients who have firms down in the city, and so now they've got like this new PTO law that they have to comply with, right? That my suburban clients don't have to comply with. So, things like that happen. So it's just, it's important they happen, on an annual basis. There's always new legislation coming down. I see, ASID is a better source for the trends in the certified designer and the registration laws, which I'm fine with. I support those. I think it's great to have a certified interior designer, because I have clients who fall under that, and I know it's great for their business. It's great for the industry. So, that's something to watch. Those aren't any of those really contractual things. So I guess, the non-compete, non-solicit things are, because those are coming up more and more. A lot of times I'm being asked by clients to have an employment agreement when they're onboarding new employees. So things that talk about confidential information, things that talk about non-solicitation of employees and things like that. And like I said, there are new legal requirements for those.
Yeah, I think, and that's a key point too, is keeping up with all of the legalities it's really impossible, as well as running a firm, which is why getting an attorney involved early in your business and how you structure it and what you need, I think more than pays for itself, which kind of brings up an interesting concept too. How does insurance play into this legal relationship? Because I see a lot of new firms saying, we're going to wait on insurance for a minute, or we're going to get to that. But errors and omissions and the various types of insurances, I feel like, are critical out of the gate and directly impact the relationship that we end up having with our legal team potentially.
Absolutely. Insurance is definitely one of those key areas that you want to look at from the moment you start your business. And it's certainly one of the issues. It ticks one of the boxes when I'm working with startups. There's a couple of different kinds of insurance to look at. And before I kind of get into those, it's just when you think about what is the point of insurance? The point of insurance is to have some money for a rainy day, right? So, there might be situations where you get sued by a client. They do happen. You get sued by a client, you need to sue a client. There's, their employee has a slip and fall on the job site. There's any number of random occurrences for which we have insurance. So I'm big proponent of having insurance and having the right kind of insurance. General commercial liability insurance is pretty good. Will cover most of your bases, most of your business-related risks. Things that it may not cover that you would want to talk to your agent about are things like advertising risk, because that might cover claims of copyright infringement or trademark infringement or unfair competition. So those kinds of things that happen, in the business world that maybe aren't intentional. So that's one thing to look at. There's also errors and omissions insurance, and that's really professional liability insurance. And that's really for malpractice type situations where you as a professional failed to meet a certain standard, and as a result, your client suffered damages from that. So you might see that like an architect would have errors and omissions, a general contractor would have errors and omissions. For the most part, a designer probably doesn't need errors and omissions, but if you are a registered designer, if you're providing, document signing services and things of that nature, and if it helps you sleep better at night to have errors and omissions insurance, this certainly, it is definitely an option. But what I recommend for all of my clients who are looking for that is go out and find a broker who can, get you the best deal, the best scope of coverage, somebody who'll be your advocate, and kind of help you get a good rate from a good company and good coverage. I've also been asked recently about cyber insurance or, cyber liability insurance. And I would say, as a general rule, I don't see the interior design industry as being like a really hot target, because there's not a whole lot of confidential information or financial information or health information that designers would have that would really be desirable. However, that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And I would talk to your insurance broker about what that might look like and what that might cost. I'd say if you're a larger firm and you're processing a lot of transactions, or, you have some maybe, some data exposure at a larger scale, certainly something to think about.
And as we close out, what do you feel like is one or two things that designers typically miss when it comes to understanding the law and legalities as it pertains to their profession?
I think the biggest misunderstanding really has to do around billing and services and sort of what they can bill for and how they should bill for it, and kind of understanding how the contract should really mirror the practice, I guess. So for a lot of clients, the process that they use, 99% of the time, they don't have a problem. That 1% of the time that they do have a problem, all of a sudden it's like, well, there isn't a proper process or something matched up to that to say, okay, well, this is what we do next. So I would say the flip side of that coin, because they're highly related, is just managing client expectations.
Oh, it's everything.
Yeah. And you have to have a sixth sense at some times to understand what the client is really concerned about, and making sure that you're clear about what you're delivering and what, not what the expectations are, but what your obligations are, right? So you have to marry client expectations with your actual obligations. And that's client management. And believe me, speaking from my own personal experience, I've been on my own since, I launched my own law firm 2 years out of law school. I learned the hard way, right? I learned baptism by fire, good client relations, and ways not to handle clients. So,
I think it's so important.
Managing
a lot of
client
times
expectations
we miss.
is key.
It totally is. And that's the core of that nugget, I feel like, is communication. There's just so much communication that has to happen. It's not just saying this is what I'm going to do and doing it. It's saying this is what I'm thinking about doing. How does it feel to you? Okay, then we're going to do it. This is how long it's going to take to do it. These were the hiccups we found while we were doing it. Does this still work for you? How does that feel to you? Okay, now that we've done it, how does it feel to you? There's so much
Right.
communication along the way. I often, joke, no one ever says, oh, it was so annoying. I was really over communicated with during that whole process. You just never hear that. People are always in the dark going, I don't know. I haven't gotten an email. I don't know. I haven't gotten a phone call. I've been waiting on my chandelier for 6 weeks. And they said it was going to be here in 4. And I feel like when you empower them with information, they're so much more capable of adjusting to the reality than having to go out there by the time they're already pissed off that they aren't getting what they want.
Right.
Yeah. Great conversation, David. Thank you so much for your time. This was invaluable. We appreciate it more than you know.
Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate you having me as a guest. So I hope it was useful for the audience.
Extremely. So, welcome to our new segment, Colorful Questions. You ask them, we answer them to the best of our ability. Let's go. First one up today. What do I do if a client doesn't want to pay the remainder of their bill? I love this question. It happens to so many designers and it breaks my heart. First of all, seek understanding and resolution. There must be some reason as to why we got here, and maybe it's because they haven't felt heard, seen, safe. There's usually a reason why. Take the time to listen. Also, make sure you have a great contract. Hopefully you've heard that today from David. The value of a great contract can't be underestimated. You don't need it until you need it, and then it better be great, right? This is one of those times. Also, the intangibles. When you first interviewed this client and sat with them, they weren't just choosing you, you were choosing them. How did it feel? Looking back is always 20/20 hindsight, admittedly. But were there key markers you could identify that when you see them next time, you're going to say, I don't think you're the best fit for us, in a loving way? Also, make sure you keep an attorney in or on file. This is so important. This is why we recommend that you make sure an interview and choose an attorney long before you need one, because in the heat of the battle is not the time to go out and find one. You want to have one in your hip pocket for situations just like this. Thanks for the great question.